Dr. All right, sounds like the recording has started. So a very good day to you, good colleagues, and a warm welcome to this Appman Tech Talk webinar. This is a fun event. It's good to connect with the vector control community. Really great opportunity to share information and talk to each other. So thank you for setting aside time to join our community of vector control specialists listening in. Just to mention, we've had more than 470 people registering for this webinar. Typically, about half that number actually attends. We'll see later on how many are actually participating, but it shows that there's strong interest in this particular webinar. And it's always wonderful to see strong representation from the Asia Pacific region, especially from government agencies, which is well over 1/3 of the participants that registered for this particular webinar. So our webinar today is going to focus on larval source management, a vector control strategy. It's been a bit neglected for decades, but it seems to be receiving a surge in interest in very recent years. And of course, that interest is very appropriate given our overwhelming reliance on LLINs and IRS and the current limitations of these tools to break away from the plateauing of global malaria burden. Our tools to reduce populations of especially outdoor biting mosquitoes are very limited, and the pressure to do something about this outdoor biting is increasing. So larval source management should be a part of the toolbox, and we should be embracing this tactic more enthusiastically, where appropriate, that is. Today's webinar will look at some of the opportunities and challenges associated with its use. So just briefly, some comments on the webinar process. We will have 3 PowerPoint presentations back to back, each between 10 and 15 minutes in length. This will be followed by a question and answer session. Audience members can submit written questions during the presentations. Please use the question box. Please do not use the chat box, please. I suggest you precede your question with the name of the panel member you would like to respond to your question, if you have a preference. So for example, Dr. Ravindra, and then your question. After the Q&A session, there's a very short poll just to assess your opinion of the webinar. It's very short. Take up 1 minute of your time, but it helps us, and I'd be grateful if you can just quickly tick the poll boxes. Please note, as I mentioned, that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the Appman and the Aurine websites within a day or so. And the details of these sites will be made available on your screens. So I want to extend a sincere word of thanks to our 3 speakers for it always takes, everybody's busy, but thank you for your time and effort in putting these presentations together and to participate and share your skills and experience with our vector control community. Thank you for that. And of course, to our audience members for taking off time to listen in. Our first speaker is Callista Chan, who will be sharing her findings regarding control of malaria vectors in rice fields. Callista has a background in infectious disease epidemiology and medical entomology, with a special interest in vector-borne diseases and their control. Callista is currently a PhD candidate at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she's exploring methods of growing rice without growing malaria vectors. So Callista, over to you. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much for inviting me. Let me just share my screen quickly. Everyone can see this?
Yep, it's clear. Thanks, Callista.
Perfect. So today I'll be talking about the control of malaria vectors in rice fields, where I did a systematic review and meta-analysis globally. As we all know, rice is a major food grain. It's a staple food crop for half of the world's population. And its demand is always increasing, as you can see on the graph on the left here. And there's been enormous efforts to boost rice production, especially in irrigated rice areas in sub-Saharan Africa. Unfortunately, even though rice does provide a lot of food security and improves farmer livelihoods remarkably, it can also generate a large amount of mosquitoes. And depending on the region where rice is grown, different sets of mosquito species are found in the water of the rice fields. In some places, rice fields are a major source of the most important malaria vectors in that region. So for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's Anopheles gambiae, sensu-lato, and then in central China, there's Anopheles sinensis. Rice cultivating areas are therefore have very high inherent malaria transmission capacity. Larval source management within rice fields have been intensively studied, but there's still a major gap in understanding of what works, where, and when. Moreover, even if the methods do work, they do not tend to be adopted by rice farmers, since rice farmers prioritize yield, which is normal, instead of mosquitoes. So together, in collaboration with rice research institutes, we think that rice experts, i.e. agronomists, should know what effect their recommended production methods have on mosquitoes. They can collaborate with entomologists such as myself and measure mosquito abundance alongside rice yield, weed production, water use, and soil properties. This thinking was actually built for the rice-malaria relationship in sub-Saharan Africa in mind, but it can be applied to Asia too. So here is a brief overview of how I conducted the systematic review. We were interested in how mosquito control methods and rice cultivation practices affect, one, malaria vector abundance, rice yield, and finally, water consumption. And the field experimental study designs that were considered included controlled time series and controlled interrupted time series. The intervention term captured a variety of rice cultivation practices and larval control, as you can see on the bottom right. And in terms of data analysis, it was structured by type of intervention, outcome, and study design. And measures of effect, which was percent difference, was calculated by fitting quasi-Poisson regressions. So in terms of the search results and study characteristics, we found that 47 publications were eligible, of which there were 84 comparisons of interventions versus control. Most of the studies were conducted between 1981 and 2000. As you can see, I think it was around 66%. And most of the studies were conducted in America, specifically in the United States, followed by Africa, and South Asia, all of which was in India, 9 in East and Southeast Asia, which included countries like Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. In terms of the results, what we saw with larviciding and biological control was for monomolecular surface films, even though it was based on 2 studies, we saw mixed results. It saw a 57% reduction in 2 control time series. And then with synthetic organic chemicals, we found that it was effective in reducing around 72% of anopheline larval numbers. Bear in mind the number of studies that were included in these analyses. And then for biological larvicides, it was associated with around 60% fewer anopheline larvae in 8 studies. And we found that BTI-based larvicides were most effective, especially against the older immatures like late-stage larvae and pupae. When biological larvicides were combined with fish, we saw around an 88% pooled reduction in 2 studies. And as for biological control, such as using rice fish co-culture, we found that it was effective in reducing the abundance of anopheline immatures, ranging around 82 to 87%, depending on the study design. And then, unfortunately, in terms of copepods, azolla, and neem, also bearing in mind that only 1 study each was conducted, it did not seem to work that well in reducing anopheline numbers. And as for rice cultivation practices, Intermittent irrigation was not consistently associated with lower densities of total anopheline immatures, but when separated into developmental stages, as you can see in the second and third lines of the table, it reduced late instars by a pooled estimate of around 35% in 4 studies. Intermittent irrigation did not significantly affect rice yield either and reduced water use by around 15%, which is good news for our agronomist collaborators. And in terms of rice variety and plant spacing, neither affected anopheline larval densities, but herbiciding was associated with increased larval numbers. Pesticiding was associated with reduced Anopheles aconitis in Indonesia. And as for land preparation, although leveling had no effect on the larval numbers, plots that were minimally tilled, as opposed to deep tillage, were associated with around 65% reductions. So to farmers, larvicides were not economical, especially at an individual field basis. And this is based on discussion points from the eligible studies. Fish were well accepted as an additional source of income and protein, whereas intermittent irrigation was a bit more mixed. It was well accepted in Portugal and in China because of increased yield and reduced water consumption. But in India, even though farmers recognized that it reduced water consumption, they thought that water distribution would be complicated to organize amongst farmers. So here's just a brief summary of the main findings. Fish, chemical, and biological larvicides were effective in controlling malaria vector densities in rice fields at all developmental stages. Intermittent irrigation, however, could significantly reduce late-stage larvae. Other forms of larval control, so monomolecular surface films, copepods, neem, and azolla, didn't demonstrate consistent reduction in anopheline numbers. And other rice cultivation practices like plant variety and density and leveling were also not associated with reduced malaria vectors, but tillage, pesticide application, and herbicide application were. So in general, we have a task to reduce the production of adult mosquitoes over a whole rice cropping season. And it seems that we have 2 classes of interventions. On the one hand, we have interventions that kill larvae quickly. So this includes chemical and biological larvicides. They also have good immediate effect, but lack residual effect. So frequent reapplication would be required. This would be very costly and labor intensive, especially if larvicides need to be evenly distributed spatially and temporally in each plot throughout 5 months in an entire irrigation scheme. So, and on the other hand, we have interventions that are not immediately lethal, but their effect lasts longer. So they help reduce breeding more consistently throughout a rice growing season. And this includes fish and intermittent irrigation. Intermittent irrigation, however, cannot be applied within the first few weeks following transplanting because rice plants need to be flooded following transplanting shock. And this is actually also the time of peak malaria productivity, as you can see on the graph on the left here. You can see peaks from ranging from week 1 to around week 3 or 4, maybe even 6. And also with fish, they take time to grow and effectively control larvae. This means that to effectively cover the entire rice growing season, maybe these 2 classes of interventions have to be combined. Short-term insecticidal interventions during the initial post-transplantation peak for the first month or so, and then followed by more suppressive long-term interventions for the rest of the season. So I've presented a lot of promising interventions, but they are location specific and they have a lot of conditions. For example, fish have their feeding preferences and intermittent irrigation have their drying timing that can be variable and determinant. And studies on rice cultivation practices other than water management have shown that even small changes in agronomic inputs, such as hand weeding and tillage, can actually add or remove footprints which affect mosquito densities. And these kinds of studies need to be pursued even more. And the ultimate aim is to get these interventions adopted by farmers. And to do so, research should be led by agronomists. As entomologists, we need to find improved methods of monitoring larvae to aid our agronomist colleagues. And because dipping throughout the season is far too labor intensive. We need to also bear in mind that these win-win solutions, or as the agricultural world and climate change world would like to call it, prefer to call it, agriculture and health co-benefits, are more well received by the agricultural sector, and they should be pushed a bit more. And an agricultural and health co-benefit, an example of an agricultural and health co-benefit includes a type of intermittent irrigation that we have been exploring as a team in West Africa and in East Africa, called alternate wetting and drying irrigation, which can significantly reduce methane emissions, water consumption, whilst maintaining rice yield. And so we're testing whether it can reduce mosquito numbers too. In the context of malaria elimination in Asia, compared to sub-Saharan Africa, Asia is actually very lucky that although it's responsible for so much rice growing, rice fields do not contribute to a large proportion of malaria transmission. But where rice fields may remain as hotspots, there may need to be a final push of environmental control to reduce transmission potential. And this is especially in areas where maybe there's Anopheles sinensis or Anopheles aconitis. This has already been done in China and in Indonesia using intermittent irrigation and larvivorous fish back in the 1980s. And I think there's been a lot of continuation since. And in some places like in India, Anopheles culicifaces may not necessarily breed in rice fields, but pools caused by irrigation nearby does favor their breeding. So environmental control would actually entail more efficient irrigation infrastructure in order to eliminate the standing water to prevent Anopheles culicifaces from breeding. And although rice fields may not be a major threat in Asia in terms of malaria, it does contribute to a lot of arboviral disease transmission, such as Japanese encephalitis, and this should not be ignored. Thank you, and looking forward to all your questions.
I'm sorry, I was muted over there, so my apologies. Just a moment, please. So Callista, thank you for that fascinating and well-structured and well-presented presentation, a wealth of information there, very, very interesting. Picked up on a number of points, found especially interesting the effectiveness of BTI and fish. And a number of other points. Callista, thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to draw a lot of questions from your presentations during the question and answer session. But let's move on first to our next speaker, who is Dr. Ravindra Jayanetti, who will talk to us about larval source management as a supplementary tool to achieve malaria elimination, the experience and lessons learned from Sri Lanka. Dr. Jayanetti is a retired district program manager, technical advisor, vector control specialist. He's done a lot of things with over 31 years of experience in the control, elimination, and prevention and reintroduction of malaria in Sri Lanka, which, as you know, is a country that was successful in eliminating local transmission of malaria. And Ravindra was part of that success story. So Ravindra, we look forward to learning from you. Please go ahead with your presentation. Thank you, Ravindra.
Thank you, Dr. Leo. I will go straight forward to my presentation. During the course of this presentation, I would attempt to illustrate the LSM efforts carried out in the past 100-odd years, highlight some missed opportunities in malaria control and elimination in Sri Lanka, and propose a scheme to use LSM as an effective tool to control and elimination of malaria. My theme is learning from mistakes. So larval source management is defined as the targeted management of mosquito breeding sites to reduce the number of mosquito larvae and pupae. These include habitat modification, habitat manipulation, larviciding, and biological control. The role of LSM in malaria elimination is considered as supplementary to core vector control methods such as IRS and LLIN, because IRS and LLIN has profound influence on the transmission. But IRS and LLIN is effective only for endophilic vectors. So exophilic vectors, LSM is much more important and much more promising intervention. But there are obvious disadvantages. LSM is effective only if vector breeding sites are few, fixed, and findable. So now I want to illustrate some LSM interventions in Sri Lanka during its control and elimination of malaria. The principal vector of Sri Lanka is Anopheles culicis. There are some secondary vectors and other potential vectors, but they are not important because in Sri Lanka, vector control in malaria is mainly targeted this species Anopheles culicis. And fortunately, Anopheles culicis is highly endophilic. So IRS and LLIN can control transmission as well as they can interrupt transmission. Anopheles culicis breeds primarily in rivers and streams. During the dry season, most of the streams in the dry zone and intermediate zones of Sri Lanka are liable for pooling. These pools are the most preferred site of Anopheles culicis. But with the onset of the northeastern monsoon and rains, there is a clear-cut shift of this species to various breeding sites such as wells, agrovales, gem pits, quarry pits, and even animal hoof prints, etc. So now I want to show malaria control and elimination phases and LSM efforts during the period of 1911 to 2011 in relation to the core vector control methods. You may have seen this graph, and you can see this first phase. I would call it pre-DDT era. It's span from 1911 to 1947, in which there was no, you can see the cases are fluctuate with millions of cases are fluctuating years and years. And you can find in 1934 and 35, a devastating malaria epidemic in which more than 6 million clinical episodes were recorded and 80,000 people died. During this period, there was no core vector control was available because DDT was not discovered at that time as a tool for malaria control. So naturally, there are LSM interventions were employed. The tools they were used were during those days were Paris green, that is copper acetoarsenate, some oil called shell malarial, and larvaceous fish, local fish such as Aplochilus and other species, and as well as some imported species, Gambusia avinis and the Poecilia reticulata. And also after this 34-35 epidemic, hundreds of siphons and flushing devices were installed because the 34-35 epidemic was caused by unprecedented drought occurred during that period. But unfortunately, the coverage of these interventions were not documented, and also impact is not very good, as you can see it in the graph. Then we go to the golden era of DDT, 1947 to 1975. As you can see, there is a spectacular reduction of malaria during this period. And this paved the way for eradication strategy. As a result, after the attack phase, we nearly eliminated malaria, because in 1963, only 17 cases were reported. But consolidation phase was failed, and as a result, malaria was resurgent in late 1960s. So during this DDT era, you can understand there was no larval source management interventions, because DDTs was very effective in containing malaria and even for eliminating it. And the next period comes, we can call it malaria control, because eradication strategy was replaced with malaria control strategy. During this period, I would call it control era and pre-elimination, span from 1975 to 2012. During this period, DDT was reintroduced in late 1960s, but they found that vector was resistant to the DDT. But then we selected malathion, and malathion, the mainstay of control during this period of 70s and 80s, and over the 17 years, and then it was replaced by synthetic pyrethroids. Since 2004, LLIN replaced IRS. So what are the LSM efforts we employed during this period? During this period, larviciding along rivers and streams using temiphos was used, and also larvivorous fish, Poecilia reticulata, and some Aplochilus species were used to breed and released to various breeding places. But only these LSM efforts were not documented, and as a result, we don't know the impact, and also this coverage is so patchy, so we don't know LSM has any impact on the control as well as elimination. But we had some research projects results in which pyriproxyfen and environmental based research projects. I will describe it in the next slide. The first project is concerned with environmental modification done in 8-kilometer stretch of Yarnwell stream, and various engineering measures were taken to ensure smooth and fast flow to prevent stagnation, and the impact was reduced vector breeding and case incidence. The next larval source management exercise was use of pyriproxyfen at a rate of 0.1 gram per liter twice a year at gem pits, rivers and stream bed pools, and irrigation ditches. And also they documented these interventions reduced vector breeding and case incidence. And also the pyriproxyfen's cost effectiveness was higher than temiphos that was used in anti-malaria campaign at that time, polystyrene beads and oil. The last one is intervention taken by anti-malaria campaign during clearing up of one of the last remaining foci during pre-elimination period. And LSM was also employed spraying chemicals along 35 kilometers of the river flowing through the Yala National Forest, where the army camp, the focus was located. The focus was cleared up. But in all three examples, all these areas, indoresidual spraying or LLIA is practiced. So we don't know exactly what percentage that this larval source management helpful for this impact. So my conclusion is LSM efforts during control and elimination were given very low profile compared to the co-vector control, IRS and LLI. LSM operations were so patchily implemented and undocumented, thus effectiveness and impact on control elimination is not clearly discernible. So what was the role of LSM in elimination? My argument is it's minimal or not at all. So I consider LSM in Sri Lanka is a missed opportunity because limited LSM efforts were not documented through the routine paper-based information system. Thus, efficacy of each LSM tool and vector density could not be discernible. And as a result, the evidence base of non-LSM tools were very weak. And LSM could have been used complementary to IRS and LLI and specifically in certain situations for better impact. For instance, specific situation where spray coverage is very low due to refusals and closed houses, we could have you make use of these LSM interventions. And the other missed opportunity was research findings have not been led to policy developments. The best example is pyriproxyfen is a very good insecticide. You need to seed it only twice a year and with a minimal concentration. And there are two post-elimination scenarios prompted this lack of evidence. The first one is the role of LSM in PORM, that is prevention of re-establishment of malaria. We started this program after the elimination. And during this PORM, we have to do reactive vector surveillance when a case is reported and also proactive vector surveillance during when vulnerable populations such as aggregated foreign labor is there. During this vector surveillances, most of the mosquitoes are potential vectors and not the Anopheles culi species. These all potential vectors are exophilic. So LSM is the only option, but unfortunately, no evidence is available for informed decision on selecting and performing the best or single or combination of LSM tools. The second example is occurrence of an invasive vector of urban malaria in India and elsewhere, Anopheles stephensi in Sri Lanka, first detected in 2018. And it is found, later we found it in all the districts in northern and eastern provinces. This species primarily breeds in wells and exclusively exophilic. So LSM is the only option for control. We tried carnivorous fish with amorphous granules. Pyriproxyfen was not there because that policy decision was not taken. So we didn't have evidence at all. So it's very difficult to eliminate this species, but I think we need to have such evidence on LSM. So the lesson learned is we have to strengthen the evidence base of relevant LSM tools. In any country who's embarking LSM need to have strengthened this evidence base of relevant LSM. The efficacy of the best possible LSM tools relevant in local context shall be explored and documented systematically through the involvement of central, district, local, and stakeholders. I emphasize this because these district and local people are the implementers. In the research programs and these district and local people are mostly overlooked. but you need to build their capacities because they are the implementers. And second thing is the evidence gathered should be then be used to develop policies such as guidelines and SOPs. And also the use of LSM tools judiciously to have better impact complementary to IRS and LLI or alone in problem situations. We all advocating integrated vector management since 1990s, but not a single country so far been able to incorporate in IVM into their health system. I think the reason behind this IVM modus operandi is highly complex and uh, and diffuse. That's why I think WHO is in 2017 proposed GVCR. GVCR explicitly described this. The pillars of actions are on the foundation of increase basic and applied research and innovations, as well as enhance vector control capacity and capability. So based on this GVCR and IVM, I proposed a systematic evidence generation of LSM tools for policy development. This embraces all the components of IVM as well as GVCR. The first thing you need to do is extract all the etymological inputs that are relevant for LSM. For example, you need to define the relative importance of each and every vector breeding site, because you need to prioritize vector breeding sites. Then you have to define the role of LSM in local context, whether it is supplementary or it is the main method, or it should be used in specific situations. Then identify potential LSM tools. There may be a handful of such tools and techniques, and then design protocols with the help of the universities, research institutes, and technical support groups. And in this design protocols, intersectoral collaboration and community participation should be integral part if they are relevant for that particular tool. Then you can implement these protocols through the district and local people with a good M&E mechanism, and results should be documented and collated to translate evidence into policy such as SOP. So once you prepare this SOP, you can readily use it in various indicated situations. That's all. Thank you very much.
So Ravindra, thank you very much for what clearly reflects decades of wisdom and understanding and insight into malaria control in different aspects, but your particular reflections on larval source management. There were lots of very interesting issues that you raised there. I found it particularly interesting you mentioning that the 1935 outbreak, massive peak in, outbreak, was associated with a drought, which creates pools and absolutely ideal conditions for specific vector species. But that also creates opportunity for more targeted and specific larval control interventions. And specifically in Africa, dry season larviciding is an underutilized opportunity, specifically for species such as Anopheles arabiensis. So good point there. I also found your comments about use of fish very interesting, and we can talk about that a bit later again. I'm sorry, my video was off. So Ravindra, thank you for that. We are now going to move on to the final presentation by Dr. Susanta Ghosh, who we already know from previous talks on Append webinars. And Susanta will inform us about Anopheles stevensii urban larval source management in India. Dr. Ghosh is a retired director-level scientist and previous head of the ICMR National Institute of Malaria Research Bangalore field unit. And he has 40 years of experience in medical entomology and vector control, also in molecular parasitology, as well as broader issues in public health and tropical medicine. So Dr. Ghosh, we thank you for your consistent support to APMEN, your willingness to spend time preparing presentations and sharing those. We look forward to your presentation. Over to you, Susanta.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. And just I want to share my, can you help me how to share this? Share one. Or from there you can share it. Better you can share from there.
I'm not sure what the problem is, Susanta. Are you having difficulty share screen?
Yeah, so from your side,
so do you see the share screen button? It's usually towards the top of your screen. Top right somewhere, there should be a button, share screen.
Should I share from our side?
so
Oh no, it's at the bottom, little green button with
yeah,
an arrow.
yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, fine.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If you can just move to the
Yes.
full screen mode.
Yes.
I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, you're sharing your screen. Okay.
It's the same. Next slide. Nothing's there.
Wilan, can you just do away with the sidebar so it's full screen?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you, Wilan. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much. And this is a good introduction by Dr. Leo. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. My talk will be a brief account of Stephensii, brief historical milestone, and specific intervention strategies under IBM, some success stories from the field in India, and the challenges and the future potential. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. If you see the history and that Anopheles stephensii, that place of origin, it was 1901, Liston first described from a village, Ilichpur, which is in Amravati district now in Maharashtra, India. And that Ilichpur was the army headquarters that time under British India. And it has got definite distinct three biological forms, which is Mysorensis, which was described in Mysore, where at just 100 kilometers away from where I stay in Bangalore in 1937. And based on the egg-rich numbers, it has been, it can be differentiated, their variant forms. And what I was finding very interesting, that Anopheles stephensii is a speckled mosquito, and all other speckled mosquito like Gambi, Sandicas, Faroti in all, Papua New Guinea, Solomon and all these islands, very, very notorious vectors. So you can see that I somehow got this article by Dr. Liston from the Indian Medical Gazette, and it's very important article. I think all should go through this article. Next, please. Slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So if you see the larval habitat of this particular mosquito, it is primarily heliophilic, means photophilic, and also photophobic, mostly freshwater, but known to be breed in the salt water also. Now, like in Sri Lanka, I was going through. Turbidity also, it can breed, and movement, they primarily still water, but vegetation, vegetation, it's they don't like much vegetation like this. And artificial containers like wells, overhead tanks, fountains, building curing waters, tap pits, lakes, marshes, slow moving rivers, and ice field and irrigation ditches, they breed. But preferably they breed in urban areas. But this Mysorins is the primary breed in the irrigation and other places. Adult feeding and resting behavior, primarily they are anthropophilic, but they are zoophilic opportunistically. Biting habitat is primarily endophasic but exophasic in warm weather conditions, and biting time dusk to night. And if you can see the global distribution now, it is the talk of the day at all level. You can see this mosquito now has gone to the East Africa area, like Djibouti, then Egypt, and now I came to know it Sudan also it has been reported. So in India you can see that it is almost present. The next slide I will show you. Next slide. Somehow I got this particular article, very important article by Singh et al., which is published in Vector Born and our colleague in NIMR Delhi. You can see this over the years, and you can see 2000 and up to 2015 recorded. You can see that which was somehow present in the Northeast East India. Now it is not available, which I inquired from my colleagues and all. So this is a very important information. I think over the years, almost I think from 1927, I found Powell has reported from the Northeast, but now it is not reported. So this is very, very important to know if you want to eliminate in the disease as such. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, if you see the brief historical milestone, you all know that whatever the elimination or say the disease, transmission cutting was after this Laveran in 1980, and then Grassi and Ross and Grassi, they defined the role of Anopheles mosquito transmission. And then most, as our previous speakers also mentioned, that before the DDT, that is pre-DDT era, was aimed mostly at LSM, and the major work was Panama Canal. But historically, LSM interventions was by F.L. Soper. He was the person. He could demonstrate that if we properly use this LSM in that part of the year 1935 to 40, he could drive away this Anopheles gambi from Brazil with Paris green. And that was fish Gambusia, which is Aphanis is a West Coast fish. Gambusia, there are many species. Gambusia holborkai is a East Coast, and since being used in 1903, and WHO suggests that LSM needs proper implementation and follow-up, which is not done, and many examples are there. I can set one example from India, which is just I think 60-70 kilometers away from I stay in Bangalore, the KRS Krishnaraja Sagara Dam project in Mandya, the classical example. I can tell you, it started from 1910, and then it was released the water in 1930, 20 years time, and a committee was formed by the Krishnaraja Warrior IV, the Maharaja Mysore. It was that time it was a princely state, construct a dam headed by a committee, the Diwan, that means Prime Minister Mirza Ismail, Chief Engineer Sir M. Vishesharaya, I think the finest engineer so far I know ever. And then malariology, Dr. B. Rao. Dr. B. Rao, he brought this Gambusia fish from India to India from Italy in 1928. And he was the first director of NMEP in India, National Malaria Irrigation Program. And the main strategy was no human dwelling within 500 meters from the canal and no seepage. Additional supporting canal was made, release of Gambusia, and all this to prevent prevent of malaria outbreak in the subsequent years. And you can believe that to have this water distribution properly, they had made additional canals, and some of example like Sarda Canal in Uttarakhand in 1932 set an example, and again in Bombay Municipal Act in 1888, you can say some efforts towards this as an example, citing this. But of late in 1985, where I spent my 40 years almost in National Institute of Malaria Research, earlier it was called Malaria Research Center, took up a huge project, Biometric Control of Malaria, and the basic and primarily objective and the strategy was larval source management. And under that, there are flagship projects like KEDA project, industrial malaria in Haridwar. Example, there's fly ash, just fill up the ditches and all these breeding sources with the fly ash, and it eliminated malaria. Konkan Railway, Goa, they did it. Urban malaria like, Chennai and many other, and tribal malaria. And Karnataka in silk growing area where I worked, and with the use of larval fish, and in Narmada Canal project, some of the, flagship projects and very good results I have cited here. Next. Next, please, slide. Yes. Now, if you see how urban malaria came into force, because over the time we could find that malaria was not restricted to the rural area, and the committee was made by Modak committee, and then 1971 urban malaria scheme was launched, with now at present 142.9 million population from malaria as well as other mosquito-borne diseases in 131 towns in 19 states and union territory. And this urban malaria now at present contributes to 10% total malaria cases in the country. So the main aim was that to prevent deaths due to malaria and reduction in transmission and mortality. The norms was that town having a minimum population of 50,000, the annual parasite incidence should be 2 or above, and the town should promulgate and strictly implement the civic bylaws to prevent and eliminate domestic and pre-domestic breeding places. And these are the major strategies: source reduction to source elimination, I should say, use of larvicides, use of larvaceous fish, space fray, minor engineering for habitat manipulation and modification, and legislative measures. I think this is the most important part for urban malaria scheme. And now many towns and cities which is not under scheme, but there are other malaria, other vector-borne diseases like Mangalore. It is not under the scheme, but now under this present NVBDCB program, all are taken care of by this program. So next. So I have mentioned a specific intervention strategy under IBM. And if you talk of the Stephensai, since my talk is on Stephensai, you can see the major breeding sources will be overhead tank, then wells, step wells, fountains, tap pits. Tap pits I have found in many places in Karnataka, Bellary, then district like, and then North Karnataka, where water scarcity, and then people that dig the kind of tap, what are the water sources, from there they make water tank, and that becomes very, very problem. And then under this one, underground machinery tank, building curing water, rainwater collection, water cooler. I was talking to my colleague, and he was telling the water cooler also this breed in Rajasthan side. Water collection near drains, marshland and cesspools, but mostly you can see I have mentioned how we will do it and who are the responsible agencies, and they will take care. So local body has a played role. PWD means Public Works Department, and Central Public Works Department has a great role to play. Their engineers have to great role to play. Household level also play a role to deal, and everybody has to take this responsibility. Otherwise, not possible. And I can mention that we don't recommend Gambusia in the urban area. The reason they don't sustain in the wells. Guppies are the best preferred fish. So that's what the reason we fell to have use of larvaceous fish in this program. Next slide, please. You can see I was mentioning, and my earlier speaker also mentioned that the EPS beads under the biometric control, and this truck, you can see the right side, it is mounted, the mission, the truck move from one place to another place, and it's a wonderful strategy for unused wells, and it can last 10 to 12 years. And there are a lot of publications says is highly effective, and I don't know why I don't use right now. Next slide, please. Yes, now some success stories from the field I can mention. Next slide, please. Yes, and you can see this particular technical series by NIMR. It was published in 1992. 7-point action plan for mosquito control in urban areas. And I can tell you this preferred for Chennai city, and this particularly I can tell you this given a proper guidelines how to make the overhead tank to be closed, the proper lid, and then these wells how to make mosquito proof. And this is very, very important aspect. And I don't know why these are not followed at the ground level. And these are there, but I don't know whether we have forgotten all these things in these particular aspects. Next, please. Now, if you see that we have done a lot of work in Mangalore city, Mangalore right now in Karnataka, if we eliminate malaria in Mangalore city, I think we can, we can eliminate malaria from the state of Karnataka at the earliest phase. And you can find that wells, fountains, and here you can find that time masonry water where building construction sites and then curing water. These two sites are very, very sites contributing maximum. Even after the intervention also they have increased their number size. So these two things in building constructions has to be taken into considerations. Next slide, please. You can see that why we are very skeptical about using LLIN or other methods in the urban area. The Stephens starts biting from the 6 o'clock, and though it has a high biting time, two peaks, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock and also 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, but that starts biting from the early evening. That means 6 o'clock starts biting. So if you have using LLINs and all these things before they go to the bed, this mosquito starts biting, and that where this LLIN has got very limited effects on this transmission. Next slide, please. Now we have developed for last since 2015, we are using a smart digital surveillance in the city, and is so effective. We have published 2 papers. I have given the reference, 2 papers published in Malaria Journal, and it went thorough review, and then you can see how this digital device is very effective for surveillance, for disease surveillance, and also for vector control mechanisms. So the alerts are given by the team, and the vector control measures are taken very fast space. Next slide, please. And this resulted in the number of cases has gone down drastically. And the senior author of Dr. Baliga, who was actually following it up, he just told me that this year, particularly January, February, March, it is less than 30 cases. And right now, I think we will take little effort, and then we may have to eliminate this disease from the city very fast. Next slide, please. And we have mapped this city, and you can see how the red zone has become a green zone over the years. And I think now if we have another 1 year, the red zone will be out. So that way, this is a very effective method for monitoring and implementation. Where we do fail, surveillance, monitoring, and implementation. If you do properly, proper strategy, I think we are going to eliminate malaria at the fastest pace and within the goal year of 2030. Next slide, please. Yes. Now I am citing a very recent article published in Malaria Journal. Our colleague, Dr. Himmat Singh in Delhi, he has done very good work there in Western Rajasthan. Just in desert area, the people, they store water in a big way, and that can be used, especially drinking water, for throughout the year. They collect the water, they call takas, and there are step wells called berries. What he simply did that this, the lead, this thing, it replaced the iron lead, which, rust over the years, and then non-iron like PVC seal tip. And that change, you can see the manpower density in almost 95% to 98% reduction within observed period, I think about 1 year, 1.5 or 2 years. Excellent, field examples we can cite, and that's what I'm citing this thing. There is a will and there is a way out, and there is no question that why larval source management cannot work. And next slide, please. I will tell you why it cannot work. What are the challenges? Stephensii is an invasive anadromous species. Everybody knows like Anopheles stephensii. Both share the same breeding habitats. Expansion of breeding to the newer breeding habitats, what I find, it was not restricted to one place, but to going to the other areas. Lack of confidence toward LSM, because we don't believe that it will go. Now the challenge is that globally over 50% of the population will live in the urban areas today, and by 2045 world urban population will increase by 1.5 to 6 billion population. Now this Stephensii will follow as soon as this urbanization will follow. If you don't take care right now, I think it will be go out of hand. Lack of intersectoral coordination. In India, urban malaria scheme activities is come under the health department, but the administrative control is under the urban department. There is a lack of coordination at all. Inadequate staffing position. Many posts are vacant in the urban malaria scheme. Lack of career incentive. Lack of expertise handling the situations. Inadequate and limited funding. Now we have many options like what but limited actions. What Sopot did with only one Paris Green, but here we have got many options. Today you can talk of many strategies and planning, but with limited actions. With limited actions, we cannot get success. Next slide, please. Now, what the future potential I'm giving? Do situation analysis, apply the appropriate strategies under FDM where it is applicable, conduct GPS tagged geographical reconnaissance. I tell that geographical reconnaissance is the backbone of LSM, what we did in Karnataka and India. And then strictly follow national building bylaws, involve town planning, legal department. Why I'm telling legal department? If we see a notice, the people, they will sue you again back. Legal department is very important. When you are reclaiming the land after filling, some people will come tomorrow, okay, this is my land. As long as land was not filled up, nobody's land. Now when you fill up, the land will, some people will come say, we are faced in Bangalore. Now slum board, water board, all 100 and towns under smart city should follow VVD protocol. I do not know whether any VVD experts are in the town planning and all. A separate funding for mosquito control projects should be made separately for mosquito control, whether it is a building construction site or canal construction, dam building, everywhere. Form a local task force involving all potential partners. Leadership and clarity of the objective. Build up confidence for LSM. Good management. It is doable, sustainable, cost effective. Entomologist with detailed knowledge of the local vectors. Very important, I'm telling you. Clearance from the local health department for any construction. Bombay bylaws says if you want to dig a well, take has to permission from the civil body. Regular training and workshops. Very important. We don't lack now these days. New recruits are coming. They don't undergo training. They directly go to the field without any experience. Community engagement with action. I'm giving this thing. Last evening, I was with this team of human, centered design workshop, and I have given many points to on this point. Vector of the species sanitation to vector modification. What we have done, we have now vector sanitation. We have gone to the vector modification, genetic modification, whatever. I say that revert this process. I think we will again come back to the mainstream and then attack the ecological needs, that is the bunker, and take advice from the experts. I think Dr. Leo and me and others have published a newsletter. In the admin newsletter, you can see that how our expert can help to other countries and other area where they need our help. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Yes, and this is example of GR I have given you. And now this thing that work as a team, you can see a big buffalo, how that lion can, in a teamwork, they can kill the buffalo and their food. So we have to work as a team, not in silos. And I can tell you how this seminar give a changing thoughts. I have given a seminar in London School in August 2006, and Chris Curtis invited me when I was attended this global parasitology meet in Glasgow in 2006, and Curtis sent me this particular poster in his own handwriting, and it is a very memorable day for me and Chris Curtis was one of the scientists. He looked forward for LSM. And I can tell you that new initiative now taken by Task Force LSM has been initiated by RN, where Dr. R.S. Sharma, he is one of the members. I talked to him and I told him that use proper technology, and there are like drones and all, it may not be work at large, and but we have to be very specific for this thing. It's a good initiative and we have to learn from our failures. Thank you so much. And any questions and this thing, I'll be happy to answer these questions.
So, Dr. Ghosh, wonderful, fascinating, very interesting presentation delivered with your usual enthusiasm. Wonderful to listen in, and it addresses an extremely important topic, that of Anopheles stevensii, which everybody knows poses a serious threat in Africa with high potential for spread. A whole new layer of malaria, not rural areas, but in urban environments, which would be new for Africa. The response thus far is limited to risk analysis and talks, no real action. As far as I know, we are approaching a stage where, the bullet has left the barrel. And we need to learn from people like yourself, benefit from the experience you and your colleagues in India have in the control of Anopheles stevensii. And I have absolutely no doubt that India will be a major contributor towards finding appropriate interventions to try and address the Anopheles stevensii threat in Africa. So don't think that you fully retired. I have no doubt you're going to be pulled into teams to assist with the Africa threat. So we come to our question and answer session. Sorry, we're a bit over time. We're significantly over time, but I think it's a very, very interesting topic. And I think there's significant interest, still a lot of audience members left. A lot of people have asked for copies of the presentations, just to assure you that the presentations and the whole webinar will be posted online. It will be put on screen again at some point. Maybe either Dr. Pon or Wulan can give the websites again in the chat box. So we come to question and answer session. I just want to click over here, sorry. I'm going to start at the top, to be fair to the people who raised questions quickly. Also, when I raise a question and our panelists, what I'm trying to say is that if there's anyone in the audience that feels they have a particular need to respond to that question, raise your hand. We will gladly give you opportunity to respond. So the first question I have on my screen is, under larval source management, what method is cost effective and feasible in the field? And this comes from Dr. Rajendra Sharma in India. So Dr. Sharma, I think Callista did deal with this issue where she listed the different experimental studies that were done using different interventions for larval source management and giving the specific success rates that are achieved by way of those different interventions. But it's an important question. So although Callista, although you did deal with it, do you want to add anything to that, or should Dr. Sharma find that slide and go back and have a look at that? Do you have any additional feedback you can give about what method is most cost effective?
Yeah, I think with rice fields, there's always these operational challenges, right? And I think I can include a question that Gashu Zegeye, sorry if I butchered your name, had asked about operational challenges of applying larvicides in rice fields. Rice fields are interesting because versus the 3 Fs, the few, fixed, and findable, although they're not few, they are relatively fixed and findable. So it'd be interesting whether we could use aerial application. It has been used for more large scale irrigation schemes, but even though we can also explore unmanned aerial vehicles, it might be a bit challenging for small scale rice farmers, as I might be, that I have been quite familiar with in Ivory Coast and in Tanzania. But we do think that vector control, in order for it to be cost effective, can be built into rice cultivation practices. So farmers can be more responsible for it instead of third parties like us health workers going in. And this is much more sustainable actually to maintain mosquito reduction and malaria risk within the agricultural sector, because this is a negative side effect that they are producing, even if they might not know about it. An interesting study that has been done in Tanzania that has shown Tanzania and Rwanda about cost effectiveness has shown that they've actually mixed BTI larvicide with fertilizers. Sorry, my cat is meowing. They've mixed BTI larvicides and fertilizers for farmers to apply, and it's seen that actually there's been a lot of good reductions in malaria vectors. And I also saw a question on insect growth regulators and including that into seed treatments. I think this is a fantastic idea and should be explored.
Thank you, Callista. So I don't want to dwell too much on one question. You know, let's be fair and try and cover a spread of questions. But the team in the background are prompting me that some people have raised their hands. So let's give opportunity to one person first. Dr. Pradeep, you want to pose a question? Please unmute and raise your question, please. Good to have you on board, Dr. Pradeep.
Thank you, Leo, and greeting from me to everyone. I am not asking, but the only one clarification I just wanted to give Dr. Ghosh's presentation, which is very, very excellent and very scientific, that in India, in addition to the urban malaria scheme, 131 towns, there were 207 towns, urban areas under National Malaria Control Program, which were also under larviciding, plus some dengue spread. Around 400 towns are covered under larviciding program and some urbanized villages also. Just another query, the drip irrigation for rice cultivation practices is recommended for controlling the J area paddy fields. If they allow the drip irrigation practices, that will help. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pradeep. I'm going to go to, in fairness, so we can give each of the panelists a turn to respond as well, instead of focusing on Callista or any one particular panelist. I'm going to jump to Dr. Ravindra with a pre-submitted question. And it's playing devil's advocate for a moment. Everybody seems to be saying that we should be finding new tools for vector reduction or at least exposure to mosquito bites. And it's perfectly understandable that these concerns, if they're made in the context of Africa, where in many countries the infection burden remains very high. However, when it comes to the Asia Pacific or most parts of the region, China and Sri Lanka managed perfectly well to eliminate malaria using existing tools. And most other countries, at least in GMS and Southeast Asia, are a stone's throw away from doing the same, using existing tools. So the impression is that despite the increase in outdoor biting, effective use of LLINs and IRS will still be perfectly good tools to reach elimination together with parasite control. The pot of funding for malaria control is limited, and we must optimize our efforts in use of LLINs and IRS and parasite control before embarking on expensive mass deployment of new tools when those become available eventually. So do you have any comment in a general sense of, you know, funding is limited. The vast bulk of that goes to LLINs and IRS, which have been proven to have massive impact. How and where are we going to get additional resources for significant mass deployment of LSM? And is it justifiable? Do you have any comment, Dr. Ravindra?
Yes, interesting question, because I think now, compared to the Sri Lankan situation earlier, larval source management was a neglected output. But even for in my presentation, I would want to try to emphasize that even during those days, we could have used LSM judiciously to in specific situations, as you earlier mentioned in residual malaria, and there are problem areas. We could have make use of because the larval source management, I think, unlike LLI and IRS, you can't apply it in total coverage or carpet coverage, something like that. I think larval source management should be applied in this particular situation focally. But this again has a very high demand for decision making at local level. So until you are building the capacities of the local people, district and maybe below district level people, it could be difficult to implement LSM interventions. And also you have to think about the community, because some interventions like larvivorous fish can be easily go with the community. But unfortunately in Sri Lanka, we have completely forgot these things. And because of the success of endoresidual spraying. So we have to rethink, because now malaria is, I know it's highly heterogeneous. So you need to have focal and local competent action to control and eliminate malaria.
Thank you, Ravindra. I think that's an extremely well worded response. Well thought through. Thank you for that. So, you know, just little old me, I happen to agree with you absolutely 100%. Larval source management shouldn't be deployed at mass scale. It's a surgical, targeted intervention for very specific situations and conditions. And that applies specifically to things like Anopheles arabiensis in Africa. And Michael McDonald in the comment box, I think at one point earlier in the discussion, raised the issue of Anopheles dirus in wells, in rubber plantations. And I want to support him 100%. You know, rubber plantations may be only one small part, but they are a significant contributor to perpetuating residual malaria. So Anopheles dirus does breed in water wells, in rubber plantations. Rubber plantations cover extensive areas, and there are rubber tappers that come out and are exposed to Anopheles dirus. Very easy solution to pop in some fish, or, you know, just treat those wells. And I don't think we're making adequate use of those targeted focal opportunities that you refer to. So thank you for that, Ravindra. Dr. Susanta, your turn. So I'm going to ask, aside from guppy fish, which you recommended, or you said are very effective, aside from guppy fish, which are very effective in control of mosquito immatures in water storage containers, and gambusia and tilapia and other exotic species, what about indigenous species that could be introduced into small pools, water wells, and so on? Do you have any experience in the use of Aplochilus, Oritzia, and others? And how do they compare with guppies in their efficiency. And I raise this point because some people have made funding applications to expand, roll out the use of guppy fish into areas where they're still not widely adopted by local communities in water storage jars and so on. But the donors did not want to support breeding of exotic guppy fish. So now the thought comes up, we've got perfectly good ecologically equivalent fish species in Asia. Why can't we breed things like Aplochilus and Eurytzia dana, and there are other genera as well. So just some words from you about the use of these other genera and species as opposed to guppy fish. Any experience or any words from you, Dr. Susanta?
Yes, Dr. Leo, is a very, very important question. I tell you, this guppy was introduced in India, brought to India in 1908, more than 100 years. And I tell you, if you want to see the quality of characteristics of the larvivorous fish, the first character, they should be surface feeder. Second character would be prolific breeder. These two fish, guppies and gambusia, they are poisilidae fish. They are live-bearing fish. Every 3 months, they give breeding thousands of mothers from mothers. So equivalent to the mosquito breeding pattern. And the other local fish, the problem is that other local fish, they are all egg laying and they are just once in a year breeders. And the problem is that once the program asks that we need fish, this particular fish like Aplochilus. No, Aplochilus is also a very good fish. Now the problem is that due to the fast cultivation of rice field and use of excessive pesticides, I can tell you, this fish population has drained out. They have just, going out from the, because I come from Bengal, I have seen how this fish in the younger age, I used to catch this fish. I love to catch fish, but now if you go to this, in many areas, these fish are very limited because they are changing their breeding, their habitations and all this because of the, throughout their cultivation process, the very, very vast use of these pesticides. These two issues are there. But why I'm telling, no other fish can match with guppies and all. And I had a project international funded by Royal Society London after my publication in Transaction Royal Society. Annie Moguran, I think she is one of the best bioconservationists, and she had a project with us, and we have published an article in Aquatic Innovation. This fish actually is a corn species. They match with the local fish, and they can breed together without much ecological imbalance.
Thank you.
First. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for those words and insights, Susanta. Much appreciated. So Callista, we circle back to you now again. And there's a question here from Sheila Ogoma. Hello, Sheila. And she says, thanks, Callista. Could you explain why one has to characterize the stages of larvae when evaluating? Just an explanation, if you don't mind, Callista.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila, for the question. It is an important thing to raise because often studies fail to separate larval density into larval developmental stages, so early instars, late instars, and pupae. And it's important because some interventions work by reducing larval survival, but not necessarily by preventing oviposition. And also sometimes they also work by reducing the development into late stage instars and pupae. So that's why it's important to separate them so we can see how interventions act, whether they eliminate the late stage larvae and pupae or they prevent oviposition. And this has been seen in intermittent irrigation where they satisfy the former. And then most importantly, pupae need to be counted separately just because that its abundance is one of the most direct indicators of adult productivity. The problem is that because their numbers are so small, it can lead to increased sampling error.
Thank you, Callista. So sorry, I've just seen a message pop up here, being reminded that some people have put up their hands. So to our team in the background there, can you ask one of those persons who are interested in voicing a particular question, could you give opportunity for them? Okay, yeah, okay. Muda Kafi, could you unmute yourself and pose your question, please?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much
Muda.
for giving me this opportunity. I'm not just, maybe mine is the comment, not a direct question. Maybe according to my background, I worked in a long time, maybe due to 20 years in LSM in Khartoum, in Sudan. Really, I'm considering that we still have a problem of real guidelines to be used in the field to perform or evaluate the public health impact of LSM. For example, we present many times in RBM Vector Control group that means LSM have good impact, but still we considering WHO till now they're talking that LSM is still supplementary intervention. But if we overview the history, we see that there are many countries they start, for example, to eliminate malaria, they scale back intervention, the main intervention, and they liaise just with LSM. After that, they certified getting like malaria-free certification from WHO. I think we need, to insist in this point, that means we need real guidelines to be implemented in the field, evaluating the public health impact of LSM to allow us that, because for example, now no donors can support LSM. Once you just open the door of LSM that we need support from donors, for example, Global Fund, they say no, because WHO considers this is a supplementary intervention. I think we are, for example, an experienced people on LSM, we need to insist on that, and finally we can get real the evaluation guidelines for LSM to be used in the field. After that, we can submit the result of that trial could be done in part of Africa, Asia, and then the situation of LSM could be changed. For example, now we are talking about LSM 70 years till now, but no one mentions that LSM has public health impact to be considered for the upcoming future. Maybe this is just I need to mention.
We appreciate that, Muda. Good comment. Thank you for that. I'm going to take another question before we move on to the question box again. So at least on my screen, I have Marina next. Marina, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please? Thank you. Muda, can you drop your hand? Thank you, Muda. Drop, yeah. Marina, yeah, your turn. You need to unmute yourself, Marina. You're unmuting and then muting again. I'm not sure if it's our technical team that need to intervene. Maybe our technical team can just unmute Marina, please. Okay, I'm going, in the interest of time, I'm going to move to Zana Kulibali. Zana, do you have a question? Okay, while that is being sorted out, there's a question here from Nelson Sheen, who says, what is the percentage, or how much percentage the role of larval source management compared to adult mosquito control and malaria treatment in their role in malaria control or elimination? And this is a very pertinent question. You know, for LLINs and IRS, we have a pretty good idea, at least in certain geographies, for X number of dollars investment in IRS or LLIN, you can expect this percentage decrease in malaria case numbers as a direct result of that particular intervention. So you can link dollars to intervention effectiveness. Very good measure, or donors like to see those kinds of measures. Do we have any similar kinds of measures for LSM? Because when you're writing funding proposals, you need that kind of information. So I'm going to pose it to you, Callista, if you don't mind.
Yeah, to my knowledge, not exactly, but I think this is where modeling can come in and would be very useful. In a rice field setting, we know that a large amount of vectors that arrive into the villages actually come from the rice field. So it might not be wrong to assume that most of the vectors come from rice fields as opposed to other breeding sites. And maybe in this case, modeling would be very useful to help us let us know how each additional malaria vector in the rice field can contribute to malaria prevalence. And that's what we've been looking at in a sub-Saharan African setting in Cote d'Ivoire with some colleagues from Imperial. But it would be really interesting to include cost effectiveness into that whole modeling equation, and also to see how that affects DALIs too within rice farmers.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to respond to that question? Any evidence about dollars and effectiveness in decreasing malaria burden? Anybody, just raise your hand if you want to say something. Technical team, are we able to unmute particular participants? There's a comment here from Jeffrey.
Not from my side. I think Dr. Kwon can do it.
Your voice is coming through garbled, Wulan, so I can't hear you. So here's a comment from Jeffrey He, and I think he addresses the question partially. He says, during the early 1900s, yes, absolutely. During the early 1900s in Malaya, larval control and environmental management successfully controlled malaria and reduced malaria deaths in places where tin miners and rubber workers contributed to the economy, and then the message stops. So it's indirect measures, but here's another similar example that the French government, or the French, put together a consortium to build the Panama Canal in the 1880s. And that whole massive investment and effort died because so many of the workers died due to a combination of yellow fever and malaria. And then, of course, 1898, the discovery that malaria was transmitted by Anopheles, and also found out what transmitted, Aedes transmitted yellow fever. So they targeted mosquito control and it was primarily, well, it was a combination, but largely larval control through environmental control measures, draining of marshes, etc., but also mesh screening of houses, etc. So, but those are indirect measures. It's difficult to compare directly dollar value in relation to the impact of LLINs and IRS. So thank you for that. So here's another one from Krishnamurti Kalyanagunda. I apologize if we got your name wrong. Can LSM be a strategy to prevent invasion of Anopheles stevensii? So Dr. Ghosh, you've already responded, but Ravindra also made mention of Anopheles stevensii control. So Let me ask Ravindra, and I'll come back to you if there's time, Susanta. Ravindra, do you have any comments about larval source management as a strategy to curb invasion and spread of Stephen's eye?
So in Sri Lanka, I think I have also involved in this because
your screen is, you're frozen, Ravindra, very unfortunately. I'm going to give you 3 seconds, 3, 2, 1. Susanta.
In 2018.
Okay, carry on, Ravindra. Ravindra, you were frozen, so for about 30 seconds we didn't hear you. So please summarize your response again, if you don't mind.
Yes, in 2018, we first detected in Mana island. It is a peninsula island, and it is found only limited to that peninsula island. But surprisingly, in the mainland, we couldn't find this Anopheles stephensi. So we thought that we can eliminate this because it is a small island. So we tried our best to eliminate. But as I said earlier, we didn't have much evidence for larval source management, and we didn't have SOPs, and even we tried putting fish because the majority of the vector was occupying the wells. Wells as well as the abandoned wells. So, and we tried a lot of larval source management. We closed the abandoned wells and put larvivorous fish, but at that time we had a very shortage of stocks of larvivorous fish, guppies. And in my region, I have a stock of guppies, Poecilia residual, and Aptochilus species. So I gave it to these people in Mana. But the problem was then in almost all districts in the northern and eastern districts, now Anopheles stephensi is present. So because I think the invasion was happened in some years ago, it is not a recent invasion. So they are well established because in the people in the northern and eastern districts have a very close relationship with India. So anyway, now Anopheles stephensi is established in Sri Lanka, but fortunately not in the inside the country, except it is now confined to northern and eastern districts. So and also 97% is breeding in wells. So now we are clear about the breeding sites. So we have to, but I don't know the current development because I'm no longer in the campaign. So I don't know at present they are not they are what they are doing in the campaign to because now I think it is too late to eliminate this species. So we have to live with the Anopheles stephensi, and we have to think about epidemiologically risk situations where in vulnerable places, if there are migrant workers so are aggregated in such places, we have to target these wells infested with stephensi.
Thank you, Ravindra. So I'm sorry to harp on this subject, but it is a very important topic, this Anopheles stephensi. So Susanta, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, if you don't mind. Your opinion about whether larval source management could be an effective strategy to prevent invasion and spread of Stephen's eye. Just your opinion, please.
Yes, take the example of Soper, 1935 to 1939. how he driven away another speckled mosquito, Gambi, from Brazil. Why can't you do it the same method? I can tell you it is a, hit the bunker, the whales are the bunker. And I have given an example how our study in Western Rajasthan, just simply changing this lead of tankas, the water reservoirs, same principle, why can't you follow for the wells also? Follow the wells. If not fish, whether other things like EPS beads, unused wells, use EPS beads. And don't close these wells, because these wells are dug to recharge the water table. And I was in Gorakhpur, another experience I'm telling Leo, that people are taught that they breed in the, in the rice field. But this is the time where dry season, what is the rice field? They're breeding in the wells. We first detected this Culex titorhynchus bisnui breeding in the wells. And then we targeted the wells with these guppies. And I'm again telling you, there are several species of guppies, 40 species of Gambusia. Which species is very effective that you have to select. There are a lot of guppies now, they're selling in the market for a pet fish, killifish. That will not work.
Let me ask you this question, Susanta and Ravindra. So yes, wells are an appropriate target, both in rubber plantations or in India and in Horn of Africa, wherever, for targeting Anopheles dirus, Stevens eye, whatever. And they are few, fixed, and findable. So, it absolutely lends itself to larval control. But let me ask you this. Is it, do people, would they accept fish in those wells? How do people respond to fouling of the water by feces and so on? I have some experience in this field, but I'd like to hear it from you in your particular context. How do people view the use of fish in drinking water? Is it a problem or is it acceptable?
I have done extensively in this part of the country, and I can tell you, and people say that they're demanding fish for the use in their wells. They say that after using the fish, the well water become cleaner than earlier it was.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad you said that.
Demand from us.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Susanta. So we are well over our allotted time, but there are still 143 people participating, which reflects the level of interest. It's been a genuine pleasure. I'm going to, one last question, whether neem cake is effective for larval source management. Do we have a taker who could respond to that? Anybody want to venture a response?
I think I can respond to that in terms of in a rice field setting. This was studied, I think, in India for whether we can combine neem. And neem is useful because in rice fields they're actually fertilizers too, so that they have also been of interest to rice farmers and agronomists. But unfortunately, according to that one study, which also means that we need to do more, we haven't seen a consistent reduction in Anopheles numbers there.
I remember you mentioned that in your talk. Thank you. I think you did. You did say something about it in your presentation. So I see there's in fact only one question left, so we may as well address that one. And either Ravindra or Susanta, question from Sukumaran Vinod. Why some guppy introduced wells in coastal areas show breeding of Anopheles Stevens eye? I'm assuming the question is, guppy fish were present in the wells, but Stevens eye was still breeding there. It would have been interesting to know how many Stevens eye would have been there if the guppies hadn't been there. But any comment on that?
First, I thought these guppies are not tolerate saline water. The salinity.
Oh, coastal areas.
Yeah,
Good
coastal
point.
area.
Yeah.
So, but this is a different story because the Stephens eye is there, guppies are also there. So this kind of a situation, I can't, because sometimes I think the Stephens eye is very cunning fellow. It hides even dipping was not produced much larval harvest because they are hiding.
Interesting.
So I think something this is something to do with the sampling, and it is a characteristic because I think Stephens eye is very difficult mosquito to handle because sampling is difficult. Adults are very rare. Nobody knows where does it rests. Everything is there. So we need to think of that.
It sounds a bit like Anopheles funestus in Africa.
So I think,
to
that we
sample
have to
breeding
find out.
sites. Susanta, go ahead, please.
Yes, the which larval stage, first and second, definitely some larvae will be there. But I am sure I have extensively seen where there's guppies in the wells. If the well is clean, there's no question of any. Why Stephens eye? No mosquito larvae will be there.
Yep.
And again, the question is, what is the density of these guppies? Sometimes what is happening that, just dropping few guppies and then it's okay, we have done the work. It's not that. You need for effective, per square meter about 3 to 4 guppies. But the question is that they multiply so fast within, some founding, female is there because guppies, they store the sperms. So one they mate, so rest other mating not required.
Yeah.
So the founding guppies, they can also multiply like mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes also, they store sperms.
Yeah. No, good responses.
Yes.
So I think we need to close the webinar. It's been an absolutely fascinating, almost 2-hour-long webinar, our longest yet, but truly a very, very insightful, rewarding set of presentations. So we still have our poll questions, if you don't mind responding. But may I use the opportunity to say thank you, Callista, Ravindra, Susanta. What a wonderful group of people giving such fantastic presentations and question responses. And thank you also to our audience. Wonderful interaction, active participation by way of the questions and chat box. And to our technical team, Dr. Porn, Wulan, thank you so much for your efforts as well. So to everyone, sincere thanks for making this one of our best webinars, I believe. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thank you for making it so good. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.